Hey Adventurers, so today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Rebel's Creed by Daniel B. Green. This is the second book in his debut series, which is The Lawful Times. The first book is Breach of Peace, and the second book is Rebel's Creed. So, this is, I would classify it as grimdark fantasy. I haven't read a ton of grimdark fantasy, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second here. But I haven't read a ton of it. I would classify this as grimdark fantasy though, but it's also high fantasy. It's kind of an urban setting, but also kind of like a industrial revolution or steampunk times vibe to the story a little bit. It takes place in a city, in a major city. There is quite a bit of technology, stuff like that. So that's kind of the setting of this one and the subgenres that it kind of falls into. A lot of people say military fantasy. I haven't read much military fantasy, so I don't know if that's the case for this or not. But so Rebel's Creed, this is the second book written by Daniel B. Green. Daniel Green, of course, is the booktuber as well, or less of a booktuber now and more of a fantasy tuber, I guess you would call him. And this is his second book in the Lawful Times series, as I've already mentioned. The first book being Breach of Peace. This book has two storylines that it follows. One from a character that we've previously seen in Breach of Peace, who is Inspector Chapman, I believe is what he is. I believe he's an inspector. And now we are seeing the same events and timeline, but through his perspective. Yeah, so Chapman is one of the inspectors, but there's a lot more about him. A lot more to him than we know from just book one. And then the second half of this book follows Officer Holden Sanders, and he's dealing with the aftermath of Breach of Peace and trying to figure out the truth behind what happened. And as he makes decisions about his own beliefs in regards to the situation, in regards to the world, in regards to his faith, all that kind of thing. I believe Officer Holden Sanders was the protege or apprentice of Chlyd and her husband, I can't remember what his name is, Samuel? I think it's Samuel, in the first book, in Breach of Peace. So it's kind of this, that's the through line of the story, is they're the characters in the first book with Chapman. Now this book follows Chapman and this Holden Sanders, I believe their names are. So that's kind of the start of this book, and I'll get right back to the body of this review in a second here, but I'd just quickly like to say, if you're liking what you're seeing from an Erudite adventure, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. So there are a few things I noticed being brought out in this story. Themes, specifically. A few things and a few themes. One of those is how history is written by the victors. Those in charge tell the story that they want to be told, and that story is rarely the full truth, if it's the truth at all. And along with that, we get some exploration of how is history changed, that question. How people in power can influence the way things are portrayed in the media and what that can mean. But we also see how it does affect those who forget the truth of it or who choose to ignore it. This is a theme that I have thought about and I have been pondering for potentially a story of my own if I ever decide to write it, or if I can ever get the story figured out. But this idea of forgetting history, forgetting the truth of an event and the true context of that event. So that's part of what this story is about. We also see some exploration of government overreach, which is something that I really appreciate seeing, but something that perhaps could have been explored even more. And I'm not one who enjoys preachy books that much. I would prefer that stories tell a story and don't preach to you, whether that's in a Christian fiction book or any other type of fiction book. I don't really want to be preached at about any specific theme. But that being said, I do think that this theme could have been explored just a little bit more heavily in Rebel's Creed. And possibly in future books he does plan to do that. The last thing I noticed and really appreciated about this book was how the orphanage was portrayed. It's nice to see an orphanage portrayed in a positive light, as in the operator actually cares about the children's well-being. And the only reason I say this is because most of the time in fiction, that is not really how they're portrayed. They're usually portrayed pretty negatively, as in they can't take care of the children, they don't care that much about the children, or at least they're looks as if they don't, and it's hard life and people don't really care, people don't really want them to live like that, or however they decide to portray it. It's usually in a more negative connotation or a negative light than it is positive. And so it was nice to see that not being the case in this book. Overall, this was a decent book, but it's not my favorite by any means, and I'm finding that grimdark really isn't my genre. I haven't, as I've already mentioned earlier in the review, I haven't read a ton of grimdark, but I've read a little bit now, and enough to think it's probably not my genre. There can be stories, sure, that I enjoy in it, and that I really like in it, but as a genre as a whole, it's not something that I find myself drawn towards or find myself reaching for at all. Undoubtedly, this plays into my feelings of the book, and I haven't decided yet, but I may or may not continue with Lawful Times as a series. I don't know how many more books he's planning on writing in the Lawful Times series before he moves on to his main fantasy series that's in this set in this world that this is the precursor to. Originally he had a trilogy planned, but then he also wrote books, or Rebel's Creed was initially 2 books, one about Chapman and then one about Holden Sanders. So I don't know if he's still writing more books in the Lawful Times or not. I don't know what the situation there is anymore because I haven't really followed it, and I don't think that he's really talked a whole lot about it, at least not publicly. Maybe on some of his more private groups or something he has. I don't know what the situation is, and that's alright. I haven't yet decided if I'm going to continue, but that's not really an issue because he hasn't released another book in this series as of yet. So once he does release another book, then I can make that decision of whether or not I'll read it. This one I got pretty soon after he released it, but then it took me a year and a half or whatever to actually get to reading it. I did listen to the audiobook for this one, which was narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, and I mean, they do a decent job. I like Kate Redding's narration better than I like Michael Kramer's, but that's alright. So that is my review for Rebel's Creed by Daniel B. Green. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We post videos every Monday and Thursday, and our social media is linked in the description down below. We will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.